When it comes to running gunners, the first game you'll likely think of is Contra, and Hard Corps Uprising serves as a prequel to that entire series. It introduces us to a world that is run by an empire who flat out destroy anything that gets in the way of their plans to rule each and every nation on the earth. That is until a handful of skilled warriors finally arrive to turn the situation around, and this is where the player comes in. You get to choose from several characters who each have their own skills as well as pros and cons that make giving each a go essential to see which one you better settle into. As with most games of this type, you'll find yourself jumping to evade incoming fire as well as replying in kind with a huge selection of weapons that can pulverize the enemy. To complement this, there's also a selection of power-ups which augment your abilities, such as brief stints of invincibility as well as increased damage or defense, which all have a role to play throughout each level. And trust me, you'll be needing them, as Hard Corps Uprising is one of those games that isn't afraid to kick you whilst you're down, and although the extreme amount of difficulty may turn some players away, it's nothing that can't be overcome by getting to grips with each and every mechanic in play. Now, one aspect that blew me away was the presentation. Arc System Works have always been known for their incredible sprite work, and here with Hard Corps it is on full display. Each playable character and enemy are lovingly detailed, as well as the various effects that light up the screen when the action starts to heat up. This is only bolstered by the solid frame rate that never misses a beat, no matter how intense the encounter may be. Overall, if you're a fan of the Contra games, then Hard Corps will likely satisfy or even exceed your expectations. So if you like the look of it, there's never been a better time to try it out for yourself. If there was one word that could sum up the Guided Fate paradox, it would have to be weird, but it's that good kind of weird that only ever seems to come out of Japan. It sees you literally becoming a god and granting the wishes of those that pray by entering a sort of simulation, which allows you to answer these calls to the divine. One of the best aspects of the game is without a doubt its script, that wears this weirdness like a badge of honor, and it isn't afraid to have some fun whilst doing so. You'll come across all sorts of colourful characters throughout the story, which manage to add a real weight to the events that transpire, as well as a few laughs as the banter between them plays out. However, like most RPGs, they either live or die on the combat system alone, and luckily the Guided Fate paradox pulls no punches in this department as well. All of the action takes place on a grid, which is occupied by a series of enemies and traps that stop at nothing to bring you down. Of course, you've got several options when it comes to dealing with them, from standard attacks to more devastating magic abilities, but unlike many games of its kind, you won't be contending with leveling up your character, but instead improving the equipment you have over the course of the adventure. Nearly every piece has a skill associated with it, and the more you use it, the more experience you gain. It's a great little system that incentivizes scouring for as many items as you can, in the hopes of finding one that will make each and every encounter all the more easier. Although the Guided Fate paradox is a very challenging game, with the constant threat of being overwhelmed and losing everything you've achieved, it's this sense of risk versus reward that makes it such a compelling experience. If you never got around to playing it when it first released, then you owe it to yourself to give it a go. Anarchy Reigns is essentially a 3D beat-em-up that puts you into the shoes of one of several characters as you make your way through several campaigns, taking place in a dystopian future where pollution has taken its toll on the environment, and as a result the population has been transformed into mutated horrors. Amongst this, it's your job to try and locate a notorious criminal and bring him to justice. Now, the story itself isn't anything to write home about, but does provide an incentive to keep going throughout the campaign, and with the surprisingly cheerful and cheesy nature of each character you'll meet, it never once feels like a slog. On the gameplay front, this is where Anarchy Reigns really comes into its own, and sees each character having the ability to perform basic attacks such as punching and kicking, but also gives them several special techniques that are really effective depending on the situation at hand. As you land successful attacks, you fill up two different meters. First, you've got the special attack meter, which allows you to modify your light and heavy moves by mixing in a weapon with each attack that's unique to each character. And then there's the rage meter, that when full does exactly what it says on the tin, and allows you to go batshit crazy with increased amounts of speed and damage to boot. There are some combos you can perform as well that are based on the timing of your light and heavy attacks, and while it's not extremely deep, there is enough variation to keep it fresh. But what really kept me coming back for more though has to be the generous amount of replay value that the game brings to the table, from collectibles that unlock various costumes and concept art to entirely new characters such as fan favourite Bayonetta to play with. It's one of those games you'll find hard to put down, but actually rewards you for the time you spend with it. All in all, its over the top and ridiculous premise and gameplay will no doubt keep you on the edge of your seat right up until the credits have rolled. With the exception of Crash Bandicoot, other video game developers have attempted to break into the kart racing genre, but none of them have been able to compete with Mario Kart for the top spot. The last contender for this title you'd think of would be a game based on a Mexican cartoon show, but El Chavo actually offers up a rather compelling take on the tried and tested formula by injecting a serious amount of humour as well as its own unique take on the gameplay you'd expect to find. Now, the game is divided into 3 separate modes with cups, challenges and exhibition. The cups provide the main draw of the game and see you competing in several tournaments that unlock various rewards upon completion, but challenge is where most of the fun lies though, as it's here where El Chavo steals the show. It offers a range of objectives to fulfill, such as weaving in and out of oncoming traffic to capture the flag style minigames that inject a serious amount of fun and really shine during multiplayer sessions. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, it is largely identical to Mario Kart, and that's not a bad thing at all. One distinction though is that you can attempt to jump on top of your rivals or even ram into them with the right analog stick. This adds another layer of worry to each race because your opponents are capable of doing the same, and when coupling this with the various items and boosts found littered across each track, absolute mayhem is almost guaranteed every time you start up your engine. Even though it could be summed up as a copycat of sorts, at least El Chavo tries a few different things to help it stand out amongst its contemporaries. So if you're looking for a fun game to jump into with a few friends on the PlayStation 3, El Chavo is just the ticket and will provide hours upon hours of engaging gameplay. Rise of the Argonauts is an action RPG that takes place in ancient Greece and tells the story of Jason, a mythological character who's on a quest to locate a mysterious artifact. Like many games in the genre, you'll find yourself visiting a diverse set of locales, meeting various NPCs and getting stuck into combat where the game is arguably at its best. You've got a good selection of abilities to get the job done, and Jason can wield a variety of weapons such as spears to maces and swords, which all have their own strengths on the battlefield. While some may be slow, they provide more amounts of damage, with others allowing you to quickly dodge or parry, so switching between them on the fly according to what is happening at the time is the main key to overcoming the various obstacle the game puts forth. Weapons aren't the only option you have though when it comes to combat, as there's also various types of magic you get to wield as well. Known as god powers, they allow you to heal yourself or members of your party, as well as bump your resistance and damage, and even slow down time to take care of large groups of enemies in a flash. One notable aspect of the gameplay though has to be the various dialogue options you're presented with throughout the story, which ends up feeling like Mass Effect in ancient Greece. These options actually have meaningful outcomes which help promote subsequent playthroughs in order to see everything the game has to offer. If you're a fan of God of War or just action RPGs in general, then Rise of the Argonauts offers up a respectable take on Greek mythology, all the while delivering enjoyable gameplay that doesn't just feel like a run-of-the-mill mash to win affair. If you can find it on the cheap, it is well worth adding to your collection. Painkiller Hell and Damnation is a first-person shooter that harkens back to the days of old, and is far more focused on simply blasting enemies into oblivion than providing much more beyond that. It's basically a remake of the gory original, and sees you taking on the role of Daniel Garner, who finds himself trapped in a hellish environment, and his only option is to do what he does best in order to escape, and that is slaying everything in sight without a second thought. Gameplay-wise, it shares much in common with the likes of Doom and Duke Nukem 3D, and sees you charging through hordes of beasts, all the while taking advantage of some seriously inventive weaponry. The absurd bloodbath that develops is a visceral and at times gut-wrenching experience, but the comical script and somewhat campy nature of the narrative provide a nice contrast to the otherwise brutal aspects of the game. However, as I just mentioned, one of the highlights of the gameplay has to be the gunplay, and the various weapons that you get to use throughout each level. The well-rounded variety gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to engaging enemies, and experimenting with each of them is one of the game's biggest draws. From the handheld painkiller blender that purees targets at point blank range, to the wooden spike gun that skewers opponents to walls. And even though you're often swarmed by enemies throughout the game, all of these options come together to level the playing field and give you a fighting chance. Painkiller Hell is a great return to the days of the classic shooter, and proves that you don't need to bog down a game with unnecessary crap as long as the foundation is solid. With its gripping gameplay and beautiful visuals to match, Hell and Damnation is one game you do not want to miss. When it comes to fighting games on the PlayStation 3, the console had its fair share of options, with big hitters like Tekken and Street Fighter making their mark, but as a result many lesser known games suffered because of it and would be relegated into obscurity. One of them is Battle Fantasia, that is by far one of the most underrated fighting games on the system. As with most fighters, you're presented with a selection of characters which all possess the same basic moves such as punches and kicks, but branch out when it comes to their individual abilities and special attacks. The gameplay is similar to Street Fighter and is more slow paced when compared to Artwork's other fighting series Guilty Gear, but it still possesses a lot of depth in the systems that comprise the gameplay. You've got parries that can help you out when you find yourself in a tight spot, as well as something known as Gachi Drive, which when activated lets your character advance forward, and depending on which version you've used, you can either juggle your opponent or link together attacks that wouldn't normally do so. Now visually, Battle Fantasia has a look it can call its own. It's clear that a lot of love and attention went into the presentation of each character and stage, and when you couple this with the 60 FPS count, it ends up being incredibly easy on the eyes, and with how frantic each battle can become, you'll be all the more thankful for it. When it comes down to it, despite not having the biggest cast around, Battle Fantasia manages to make each and every one of them feel unique and fun to play. The battle mechanics aren't anything new, but are executed rather well and end up making it one of the more compelling fighting games you'll find on the console. So if you're a fighting fan who leans more towards the old school style of the genre, then this is one game you won't want to miss. Coming from the mind of Suda51, Showpiece is absolutely brimming with its brand of originality and offers up a side-scrolling shooter that sees you dashing across each level and pounding enemies into submission. Now the game is actually more film than game and is made up of 4 short animations with the gameplay interjected throughout. These short films cover a wide range of topics that are central to Japanese philosophy, including the clash between humanity and technology and the Japanese sense of spirituality and their relationship to nature. But for as enjoyable as they are, it's the gameplay that really sets Showpiece on a path to success. It's fast, frantic, and unforgiving at points, but you've got enough ways to hold your own that it never feels like an impossible task. In addition to a sword for slashing, you can briefly hover in the air after a jump, as well as cling to walls, which all have a role to play in keeping your momentum going by sliding downhill. Thanks to this sense of speed, there's a real sense of reward once you get to grips with it, as ducking and diving around each level, all the while slaying anything that moves, is something that just never gets old. But just as compelling as the gameplay is the presentation, and much like Suda51's other works, it's all presented in a cel-shaded fashion, with some truly imaginative designs throughout. This is mainly reserved for the bosses that range from the grotesque to the absolutely absurd, like running away from a giant dog to tackling flying monstrosities that manage to put up a real fight. On the whole, Showpiece is a rather odd experience, and if I'm being honest, I would have preferred a bigger emphasis on gameplay rather than the animations that make up the adventure, as it was just so damn good to work through each level. It's not a deal breaker by any means, but if you're not a fan of anime, you might want to sit this one out. Record of Agarest War puts you into the shoes of Leonhardt, a former aristocrat who is killed in action immediately after the game begins. As he drifts away from the world, he's confronted by a mysterious woman who offers him a deal to save his life. Leon's soul, as well as those of his descendants, are required to fulfill her plan for as long as it takes to be fulfilled, and of course it's not exactly to the world's benefit. What starts out as a pretty cliche premise soon flourishes into a grand narrative that's filled with plenty of twists and turns as you make your way towards its end. But for as good as the story is, thankfully the gameplay is just as compelling. It's basically a turn-based strategy RPG with a huge emphasis on something known as soul breeding, which allows you to augment your characters by choosing who they marry over the course of several generations. This system has a good amount of depth, with who you choose to marry having an important effect on the weapons you can wield as well as the stats that you can allocate. By far though, the high point of Record of Agarest is its battle system, which is largely split up into 2 separate phases. The first sees you being able to move and position your units across the grid-based battlefield, and the second allowing you to engage with any enemies you may come into contact with. You've got a varied set of moves and special skills to carry out, with the main focus being to land a series of combos in the hopes of breaking the enemy that leaves them open to huge amounts of damage. When push comes to shove, the mix of fantasy, turn-based strategy and RPG dating is for sure an intriguing combination, but it would have been nice to have seen the system further fleshed out and be less reliant on style and instead provide a bit more substance. The battles more than make up for any shortcomings though, so if you're a fan of the genre, I say there's plenty here to love. Coming from the same company that brought us the likes of Odin Sphere and Muramasa, Dragon's Crown is a side-scrolling beat-em-up with several RPG elements thrown in that help it stand out amongst the crowd. The first thing many players will notice are the undeniably gorgeous visuals that help make up the world of the game. The individual frames and movements of each character are drawn exceptionally well, and each action you perform feels as natural and fluid as it should. But for as good as the graphics are, without just as exceptional gameplay to back it up, it wouldn't mean a thing. And Dragon's Crown delivers on this front as well. As with many beat-em-ups, the gameplay is fast-paced and has the potential to become chaotic when the screen starts to fill up with a near impossible amount of enemies. And of course, each character is noticeably different, with their own attributes and ways of contributing to each fight. So much so that playing as each is essential in order to find one that shares your style of play. For as frantic as the gameplay can become, getting stuck into the RPG aspects of the game can be just as rewarding. Naturally, you'll find yourself earning experience and leveling up over the course of the game and equipping your character with increasingly powerful items and weapons that you can find throughout each dungeon. You'll also be able to learn new skills that either expand or entirely change the abilities of your characters, and while it doesn't offer up as much customization as some other RPGs do, it still allows you to modify your character's skills to fit your own preferences to a good degree. If you're fond of classic arcade games, then Dragon's Crown is definitely something worth picking up. Well, that does it for another video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos that release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Alfred, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.